Ethan Lancaster never believed in fate, until the moment he saw her. The room shimmered under the glow of golden chandeliers, their crystal facets reflecting across the polished marble floors. The Celeste Royale Hotel had spared no expense for this wedding. Pristine white tablecloths, cascading arrangements of roses and peonies, the soft clink of champagne glasses mingling with the delicate notes of a live violin. But Ethan wasn't here to celebrate. He had come for one reason: a business meeting. Or at least that's what he thought, until he stepped through the grand oak doors and found himself in the middle of an extravagant wedding he wasn't invited to. His sharp gaze scanned the opulent ballroom, searching for the face of his supposed business contact. But instead, his eyes landed on her. Sienna Hart. She stood near the altar, a vision of effortless elegance in a flowing, pale blue silk gown. The candlelight flickered across her skin, catching in the soft waves of her dark brown hair, loosely pinned with delicate precision. Unlike the other guests, who laughed and toasted with sparkling wine, Sienna wasn't smiling. She was still, lost in thought. And then her eyes lifted. For the briefest of moments, they met his. Time stilled. Even through the elegant facade she wore so well, Ethan saw it, the shift in her expression. A flicker of something unexpected. Surprise? Hesitation? Something deeper? 7 years. That's how long it had been since they had last seen each other. 7 years apart. 7 years of pretending the past was behind them. Sienna blinked. Then, with measured grace, she turned away, as if he had never been there at all. But Ethan knew better. She had seen him. And whether she wanted to admit it or not, she couldn't ignore the past forever. Exhaling slowly, he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, a slow, knowing smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. He should leave. He shouldn't let that fleeting glance affect him. But should had never been a word Ethan Lancaster paid much attention to. Tonight, he wasn't going in. The scent of expensive perfume and aged whiskey lingered in the air, mingling with the faint notes of a jazz quartet playing in the background. Crystal chandeliers draped in soft golden light reflected off the polished marble floors, casting shifting patterns across the sea of elegantly dressed guests. Conversations hummed in gentle waves, laughter rippling through the room like the effervescence in the glasses of champagne that waiters carried effortlessly across the floor. Near the grand cocktail bar, a hand wrapped around a glass of scotch, the ice clinking softly as it melted into the amber liquid. Ethan Lancaster remained still, leaning casually against the counter, but his focus was elsewhere. Across the room, a figure moved with calculated ease, gliding between guests as if she belonged yet remaining distant enough to keep the world at arm's length. Sienna Hart. She was approaching now. The slit in her gown shifted with every step, revealing glimpses of smooth skin against the deep blue silk. There was a quiet power in the way she carried herself. Shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, like a queen walking toward a battle she had already decided she would win. But Ethan knew better. He saw beyond the carefully measured pace, beyond the mask of indifference she had mastered so well. She was unsettled. She stopped a few feet from him, not close enough to be intimate, but not far enough to pretend he wasn't there. Her presence carried the kind of weight that made the air feel heavier, pressing against the space between them. Ethan didn't move, didn't speak. He let the silence settle, let it tighten around them like a slow, deliberate pull of a thread unraveling. And then, her eyes met his. They were as sharp as he remembered, dark pools of intensity that once held a fire strong enough to burn through him. But tonight, there was something else. Something colder. A challenge. The hum of conversation around them seemed to dim, the clinking of glasses and distant laughter fading into background noise. It was just the two of them now, locked in an unspoken standoff. A passing waiter offered a tray of champagne, but neither reached for a glass. Neither looked away. Ethan knew what she was thinking. He could see it in the way her lips pressed together, in the slight tension at the corners of her jaw. She wanted to ask. She wanted to demand an explanation. But Sienna Hart never gave away her emotions that easily. Instead, she lifted her chin ever so slightly, a silent declaration that whatever this was, whatever unfinished business lay between them, she wasn't about to let him control the narrative. And that was exactly why he had never been able to forget her. A slow smirk tugged at Ethan's lips. This night had just gotten even more interesting. The warm glow of the chandeliers draped the grand ballroom in a golden haze, casting flickering reflections on the polished marble floor. The air vibrated with the soft melody of a live string quartet, the gentle hum of conversation fading as the music took center stage. The scent of jasmine and aged bourbon lingered, wrapping around the room like an invisible embrace. At the center of it all, the bride and groom stood beneath a floral archway, lost in their first dance as husband and wife. The moment was picture perfect, the kind that belonged in a magazine, where love looked effortless, untouched by the weight of reality. Sienna Hart stood at the edge of the dance floor, fingers gripping the stem of her champagne glass, watching as couples began to follow suit. One by one, guests moved toward the polished wood, the flickering candlelight catching the swirls of silk and satin as they stepped into rhythm. A voice, smooth, commanding, cut through the ambient noise, drawing her attention. The bridesmaids. They were being called forward. A quiet exhale left her lips, barely audible over the music. It was tradition, expected. And though she had spent years mastering the art of sidestepping things she didn't want to confront, this was different. This wasn't something she could simply walk away from. A polite smile masked the hesitation she felt as she set down her glass and stepped onto the floor, the weight of countless eyes brushing against her like an unspoken demand. She took her place among the others, waiting for the moment to pass, for the formality of it all to dissolve into the next phase of the evening. Then, just as the music shifted, she felt it. A presence, a shadow brushing against hers, close enough that she could sense the warmth radiating off of him. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. Ethan Lancaster. The realization settled in her chest like a slow-burning ember. And then, a hand extended toward her, strong, steady, uninvited. She hesitated, just for a moment. But that was long enough. Fingers, warm against her own, curled around her hand, guiding her forward before she could decide against it. And suddenly she was moving. The world around them blurred. Distant laughter, the delicate chime of glasses, the murmured conversations of those who watched from the sidelines. None of it mattered, because as Ethan pulled her into the dance, time folded inward, shrinking the entire universe to the space between them. His touch was effortless, as if the years hadn't dulled his instinct to lead. Their steps found each other with an unsettling familiarity, their movements fluid, synchronized in a way that neither had expected, but neither fought against. She told herself she wouldn't look at him, but the moment she did, it was too late. His gaze held her captive, dark and unreadable, filled with something dangerous, something that felt far too much like the past pressing in, refusing to be ignored. The scent of his cologne, woodsy, clean, was the same as it had always been. The way his grip firmed against the small of her back, guiding her with effortless control, sent a ghost of a memory rushing through her. She knew this man. She had once known every single thing about him. But now, here they were. Two strangers dancing in a room filled with people who had no idea what lay beneath the surface of their perfectly measured steps. The music swelled. A spin. A pull. Their bodies aligned in a way that made it impossible to ignore the closeness, the way her breath hitched when his palm brushed along her waist, the way he caught her, seamlessly, instinctively, when she faltered for just the briefest second. His voice, low and almost amused, broke the silence between them. She didn't respond. Didn't trust herself to. Because for the first time in a long time, Sienna Hart wasn't sure she could keep pretending. Beyond the grandeur of the ballroom, past the murmuring crowd and the shimmering chandeliers, lay a quieter world. A private retreat from the opulence, the poolside bar at Celeste Royale. The soft ripple of water reflected the golden glow of lanterns that flickered against the evening breeze. A faint murmur of jazz played from the hidden speakers, weaving seamlessly into the hush of intimate conversations. Ethan Lancaster leaned against the sleek marble bar, his glass of bourbon half full, the condensation pooling beneath it. The night air was cool against his skin, yet the warmth of the drink settled deep in his chest. He had always preferred spaces like this, removed, unhurried, a place where the world softened at the edges. But tonight, there was a shift in the air, a presence approaching, calculated, purposeful, Sienna Hart. She moved with a quiet elegance, her heels clicking softly against the tile, her gown catching the light in silken ripples. But beneath the polished grace, there was something restrained, an urgency, a hesitation tightly coiled beneath the surface. Ethan didn't turn right away. He let the silence stretch, let her stand there, feeling the weight of whatever had brought her to him. He had learned long ago that patience was the most powerful advantage. And then, finally, she spoke. No pleasantries, no unnecessary words, just a request, an impossible one. He almost laughed at the irony. She needed him. Of all the people in this place, after all the years that had unraveled between them, it was him she had to ask. His grip tightened around the glass, amusement flickering in his gaze as he finally turned to face her. She stood tall, her expression unreadable, but he knew better. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept her hands at her sides, resisting the urge to cross them in front of her chest. A silent defense mechanism. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to ask. And that made this moment all the more intriguing. Ethan let the request linger between them, rolling it over in his mind, weighing his response. The logical thing would be to decline. This wasn't his affair, not his obligation. But then again, logic had never dictated his decisions where she was involved. A thought surfaced, a rare opportunity. He set his drink down, the clink of glass against marble barely audible beneath the steady hum of the night. And then, with a measured breath, he named his price. Not money, not recognition. A dinner. One night. Just the two of them. A flicker of something passed through her eyes, annoyance, suspicion, something unspoken that he couldn't quite name. She exhaled, barely perceptible, and he knew he had her. She thought this was nothing. Just a favor for a favor. A transaction. What she didn't realize, what neither of them realized in that moment, was that this would change everything. The night unfolded above the city, draping the skyline in a cascade of lights, golden specks stretching infinitely toward the horizon. Lumiere Fine Dining sat perched at the top of one of the most exclusive high-rises, a glass-walled sanctuary that overlooked the world below. The air up here was different, thinner somehow, untouched by the noise of the streets. It was a place where people came to escape, to indulge in quiet luxury, where every detail, from the crisp linen tablecloths to the faint notes of classical piano drifting through the air, was meticulously curated. And Ethan Lancaster was a man who understood the power of presentation. The table he had chosen was near the edge of the terrace, offering a panoramic view of the city shimmering beneath them. A candle flickered between two wine glasses, casting soft, wavering shadows over polished silverware. The sommelier had already been briefed, the menu carefully selected. Nothing was left to chance. But this moment, was the one thing he couldn't fully control. Across from him, Sienna Hart sat poised, her expression unreadable. She had dressed for the occasion, sleek, refined. But there was something about the way she carried herself that betrayed her, a certain restraint, as if she was bracing for a game she wasn't sure she wanted to play. She hadn't wanted to be here. That much was clear. And yet, she had come. The first few minutes passed with the precision of a well-rehearsed script: polite conversation, surface-level pleasantries, work, business, safe topics that neither of them had to feel too much about. But beneath the polished words, something else simmered. A tension. A weight. The unspoken history between them sat at the table like a third presence, invisible but impossible to ignore. Ethan watched her carefully, noting the way she moved, how she reached for her wine glass but barely took a sip, how her fingers toyed absent-mindedly with the edge of her napkin. Little things. Subtle tells. She was holding something back. He knew the feeling. As the courses arrived, delicate plates of seared scallops and aged steak, the conversation began to shift. It was slow at first, a careful unraveling. Talk of the present bled into fragments of the past. Old memories surfaced between the lines. A mention of a city they had both once called home. A reference to a time when things had been simpler. A glance, just the briefest second too long, that neither of them had meant to hold. And then, somewhere between the first glass of wine and the second, the weight of pretending began to slip. Sienna let out a quiet laugh, unexpected, unguarded. It was barely more than a breath, but it was real, and Ethan felt it like a shift in gravity. She caught herself immediately, eyes flickering downward as if she could retract the moment, as if she hadn't just let a crack form in the carefully constructed distance between them. But he had seen it. More importantly, he had felt it. For the first time that evening, the air between them changed. Not just tension, not just history, but something deeper, something dangerous, something that neither of them were sure they were ready to face. And yet here they were. The morning light filtered through the towering windows of Urban Brew and Company, casting long shadows across the sleek, minimalist space. The cafe, a favorite among the city's elite, hummed with a quiet energy. Businessmen murmuring over their espresso shots, consultants typing away on sleek laptops, baristas moving with mechanical precision as the scent of freshly ground coffee filled the air. Ethan Lancaster had arrived early. He had chosen a corner table, one with a direct view of the entrance, where he could observe without interruption. A small luxury in a world where control was everything. His coffee sat untouched, steam curling into the cool air, but his focus remained on the door, waiting, anticipating. And then she arrived. Sienna Hart moved through the cafe with the kind of effortless confidence that turned heads without trying. The muted morning sunlight caught in the deep auburn strands of her hair, casting a warm glow against the crisp white of her blouse. She carried herself like a woman who belonged everywhere and nowhere all at once, an enigma wrapped in silk and steel. She spotted him instantly. No hesitation. No small talk. She slid into the seat across from him, the scent of jasmine and something faintly citrus lingering in the air between them. If the events of their last encounter, the dinner, the conversation that had unraveled too much, had left any lingering discomfort, she didn't show it. But Ethan saw everything. The careful way she placed her purse to the side, the way her fingers hovered for half a second before reaching for the menu, as if giving herself something, anything, to do. He let the silence sit between them, unspoken questions coiling like tension in the air. Then, finally, he slid a folder across the table. Leather-bound. Crisp. The kind of presentation reserved for something serious. She opened it. Architectural blueprints, renderings of a luxury development, expansive glass facades, modern interiors drenched in understated opulence. A project that would redefine city living, the kind of thing that made headlines. Her fingers grazed the edges of the paper, taking it all in. The details, the scope, the implications. And then, a flicker. Not hesitation. Recognition. This wasn't just an offer. It was a statement, a challenge. A seat at a table she had spent years proving she belonged at. Still, something remained unspoken, hanging between them like the weight of a question neither wanted to ask. She looked up, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held the answer before she even spoke. And just like that, the course of everything shifted. The air was thinner up here, on the top floor of Lancaster Holdings Tower. The entire city stretched below, a vast expanse of steel and glass, shimmering beneath the late afternoon sun. The view was commanding, a reminder of power, of ambition, of the heights one could reach with enough determination. But inside the office, within the silent space between two people who knew each other too well, the air was heavy. Sienna Hart stepped into the room with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood. She carried herself the way she always did, composed, precise, untouchable. In her hands, a black leather portfolio, a symbol of her preparation, a shield against anything that might make this meeting feel like more than just business. Ethan Lancaster was already there, seated behind the sleek glass desk, waiting. He didn't rush her, didn't break the silence as she set down the folder and flipped it open, revealing blueprints, color palettes, concept sketches, every detail of her vision for his project. She spoke in clean, measured sentences, outlining her ideas with the same confidence that had made her one of the best in her field. No hesitation, no uncertainty, strictly professional. But Ethan wasn't looking at the sketches. He was looking at her. He had seen her like this before. Years ago, back when late nights were spent debating ideas over takeout and cheap wine. Back when their ambition had fueled them both, but something deeper had pulled them together. Now, as she spoke, he recognized that same fire, the same brilliance. But there was something else too. Distance, a deliberate restraint. She was giving him only what was necessary, nothing more. He let her finish, let the last words settle into the stillness of the room. And then, finally, he broke it. Not with a critique, not with questions about the project, with something else entirely. A statement. A truth neither of them had dared to voice until now. The shift was immediate. A ripple through the calm surface. Sienna's fingers tensed against the table's edge. For a brief second, her mask slipped, just barely. A flicker of something deeper in her expression, something she fought to suppress. The room seemed smaller now, the walls closing in around them, the cityscape beyond the windows nothing more than a blur. Ethan didn't move, didn't look away. He had given her the opening. And now, he waited. Waited to see if she would acknowledge the weight of what still lingered between them. or if she would do what she had always done. Walk away. The city pulsed below them, a sea of gold and silver lights stretching infinitely in every direction. From the rooftop lounge of Skyline, the world felt distant, almost unreal. The streets were nothing but thin, glowing veins, cars no more than scattered fireflies drifting through the night. Up here, above the weight of reality, everything seemed quieter, more dangerous in its intimacy. The terrace bar was carved into the skyline itself, an open expanse of glass and steel where power brokers and elite clientele spoke in hushed tones over aged whiskey and imported cigars. A low hum of jazz floated through the air, smooth and effortless, weaving itself into the conversations that never truly ended. And at one of the farthest tables, away from the crowd, away from prying eyes, Ethan and Sienna sat across from each other. The dim lighting softened the sharp angles of their faces, casting deep shadows where the flickering candlelight couldn't reach. A nearly empty bottle of wine sat between them, the deep crimson staining the inside of their glasses, untouched for the past few minutes. They had started the evening with the usual pretenses: talk of work, of logistics, of deadlines and strategies. But somewhere between the first pour and the second, the conversation had shifted. The veneer of professionalism had cracked, just enough for something else to slip through. Now, silence sat between them, thick and unspoken. Sienna leaned back, her fingers tracing slow circles around the rim of her glass. The city lights reflected in her eyes, but her gaze was elsewhere. She was thinking of the past, of things that couldn't be undone. Ethan watched her, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. He had spent years perfecting that look, the kind that revealed nothing, that made him untouchable in the boardroom, in negotiations, in life. But not here. Not with her. A breeze swept across the terrace, cool against the heat of the evening. It brushed against the strands of her hair, sending them dancing across her cheek. She didn't notice. But he did. He always noticed. Another beat of silence passed, and then, finally, he spoke. No preamble, no carefully measured words. A simple truth, a shift in the air, her fingers stilled against the glass, barely a breath. But enough. Enough for him to see the way her chest rose just a little sharper, the way her lips parted. Not quite a response, not quite a refusal. For the first time all night, she looked at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. And in that moment, it wasn't the city lights or the wine or the music that mattered. It was the undeniable pull between them. The weight of every unsaid word, every stolen glance, every moment that should have been but never was. And maybe, just maybe, this time, neither of them would walk away. The penthouse stood high above the city, perched like a glass fortress against the midnight sky. Through the towering windows, the skyline stretched endlessly, a sea of golden lights, shifting and breathing like something alive. From up here, the world below seemed almost insignificant, a blur of neon and movement, a place that once dictated everything but now felt impossibly far away. Inside, the air was thick with something unspoken. Sienna stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her silhouette outlined against the distant glow of traffic weaving through the streets below. The space around her was sleek, modern, impeccably curated, just like the man who owned it. Dark marble countertops, soft leather furniture, recessed lighting that cast shadows in all the right places. It was beautiful, controlled. But control was the last thing lingering between them now. Behind her, Ethan moved with the quiet confidence of someone who always knew exactly what he wanted. There was no hesitation in the way he crossed the room, no second-guessing in the way he reached into his pocket. And then, a flicker of silver. A key. Small, simple, but heavy in what it meant. He set it on the glass table between them, the sound barely audible but somehow deafening in the silence. Sienna didn't move, didn't reach for it. Instead, her gaze lingered on it, as if touching it would make this moment real. She had spent years mastering the art of restraint, of keeping people at a safe distance. It had been a necessity, a survival instinct, because letting someone in meant giving them the power to leave. And now, here it was. A door opened, a choice placed before her. For the first time, there was no pretense, no games, just a truth neither of them could avoid any longer. Her heartbeat drummed in her ears, a steady, unrelenting rhythm. She knew what this was. Not a gift, not an invitation, a decision. Her fingers curled at her sides, nails pressing against her palms, grounding herself against the weight of it. She had been here before, standing at the edge of something dangerous, something bigger than herself. And last time, she had walked away. But now? Ethan watched her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes told her everything. The key, the moment, the words unspoken but understood. And just when she thought she might break the silence, he closed the distance. Slow, deliberate. His presence was a gravity all its own, drawing her in, pulling her toward something she had spent too long resisting. And then, finally, she let go. A sharp inhale, a step forward. The kiss came like a storm breaking against the shore. Years of tension, of longing, of unfinished business, all of it unraveled in a single, undeniable moment. His hands gripped her waist, pulling her closer, as if daring her to disappear again. But she didn't pull away. This time she stayed. And for the first time in years, the past no longer mattered. Because this, right here, was where they were always meant to be. The night stretched endlessly beyond the edge of the horizon skyview penthouse balcony. Below, the city pulsed with life, its golden lights flickering like distant constellations. Beyond the skyline, where the world faded into darkness, the ocean lay still. Vast, unknowable, a mirror reflecting the silver glow of the full moon. Sienna stood at the railing, her hands resting lightly on the cool metal. The breeze carried the salty tang of the sea, weaving through the loose strands of her hair, sending them dancing against her skin. The air was crisp, heavy with the quiet hum of something inevitable. She gazed out over the horizon, but her mind was far from the view. Memories flickered in and out, shadows of past choices, of roads she had walked alone, of doors she had once left closed. For so long, she had convinced herself that she had everything she needed: independence, success, control. And yet, standing here now, with the world stretched out before her, she realized none of it had ever felt like this. The warmth came before the touch, a presence behind her, solid and certain. Then, arms wrapping around her waist, the embrace was slow, deliberate, a silent promise. No rush, no hesitation, just the quiet certainty of someone who wasn't going anywhere. Ethan. His chin dipped slightly, breath warm against the side of her temple. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. For a moment they simply stood there, watching the city shift and breathe beneath them. And then, finally, she let the last of her walls fall. A soft exhale. A truth, spoken more to herself than to him. Life was never meant to be predictable. And perhaps, she thought, that was the beauty of it. Behind her, Ethan's hold tightened ever so slightly, his chest rising and falling in quiet agreement. Because sometimes, the most unexpected things, the ones you fought against, the ones you tried to outrun, ended up being the only things that ever truly mattered. The night whispered around them, the city's heartbeat steady below, the ocean stretching infinitely ahead. And there, under the glow of the stars, the past no longer mattered. Only this, only now, only them.